The moonlight cast an eerie glow on the cedar deck, its polished surface gleaming with an almost unnatural sheen. Mark Thompson stood perfectly still, his fingers wrapped around a glass of scotch, watching Karen Johnson, his newest neighbor, arrange her designer throw pillows with the precision of a military strategist. It was supposed to be a simple neighborhood gathering, a late summer evening soiree that would, Mark knew, become the talk of their quiet suburban cul-de-sac. Karen had been planning this for weeks, dropping not-so-subtle hints at the community mailboxes during morning dog walks and at the local farmers market. Her invitations were more like proclamations, each one carefully crafted to suggest that attendance was less of a choice and more of a social obligation. Mark had lived in the neighborhood for 15 years. He'd seen countless such gatherings, watched ambitious newcomers attempt to climb the social ladder with meticulously planned events. But something about Karen was different. Her determination bordered on obsession, and her perfectly curated lifestyles seemed to have one singular purpose: to impress and dominate. What Karen didn't know, what none of her carefully selected guests would suspect, was the secret mechanism built into this deck. A modification so subtle, so ingeniously designed, that it would transform this seemingly ordinary evening into something extraordinary. As guests began to arrive, Mark observed them with a calculated calmness. Sarah Reynolds from 2 doors down arrived first, wearing a pastel sundress that screamed, "I'm trying too hard." Then came the Peterson twins, their matching linen outfits a testament to Karen's unspoken dress code. Each guest was greeted with Karen's trademark smile, bright, wide, but never quite reaching her eyes. "Isn't this just perfect?" Karen's voice rang out, her hands sweeping across the deck as if she were presenting a museum exhibit. "I've been planning this for months. The lighting, the seating arrangement, everything is precisely calculated." Mark took another sip of his scotch, the ice clinking against the crystal glass. He knew something they didn't, something that would make this evening unforgettable. The deck was immaculate, each piece of furniture positioned with mathematical precision. Decorative lanterns hung from carefully installed brackets, their soft light creating pools of warm illumination. Potted plants lined the edges, their leaves seemingly arranged to create natural dividers between conversation zones. "Mark," Karen called out, her tone suggesting this was less an invitation and more a command, "come meet everyone properly." He smiled, a smile that might have seemed friendly to the untrained eye, but carried a hint of something else, something that suggested he knew exactly what was coming. As the night settled in, the conversations grew louder, more animated. Glasses clinked, laughter punctuated the warm evening air. Nobody noticed the almost imperceptible mechanism beneath the deck's surface. Nobody except Mark. Karen continued to play hostess, moving between groups, ensuring every interaction was monitored, every conversation subtly guided. She was a conductor of social interactions, believing she could control every single moment of this gathering. But control, Mark knew, was an illusion. And by the end of the night, Karen would learn that lesson in the most unexpected way possible. The first stars began to twinkle overhead, unaware of the drama about to unfold on this seemingly ordinary suburban deck. As the evening progressed, the subtle tension beneath the surface began to simmer. Mark watched with calculated patience, nursing his scotch and observing the intricate social dance unfolding around him. Karen continued to orchestrate the gathering with the precision of a symphony conductor, completely unaware of the mechanism that lay dormant beneath her meticulously planned setup. The Petersons were discussing their recent Mediterranean cruise, their voices rising with each glass of Chardonnay. Sarah Reynolds had positioned herself strategically near the appetizer table, her laugh a touch too loud, her gestures a bit too deliberate. Mark recognized the social maneuvering. He'd seen it 1,000 times before in neighborhoods just like this. "Did you hear about the Andersons' renovation?" Sarah was saying to no one in particular, her eyes darting around to ensure she had an audience. Absolutely astronomical costs, but you know how they are, always trying to one-up everyone. Karen moved in, her smile razor-sharp. "Speaking of renovations," she interjected, "I've been thinking about some updates to this deck." "Mark, you've been here the longest. What do you think about some improvements?" It was a loaded question. Mark could see the challenge in her eyes. An invitation to engage, but also a subtle probe to establish her own superior taste and vision for the neighborhood. "Improvements?" Mark replied, his voice calm and measured. "Some things are best left exactly as they are." A cryptic response that caused Karen to narrow her eyes slightly. She opened her mouth to probe further, but was interrupted by the arrival of Tom Harrison, the neighborhood's most recent transplant. Tom was a tech executive who spoke in startup jargon and wore expensive watches that cost more than most people's monthly mortgage. "Incredible setup," Tom announced, running his hand along the deck's railing. "Must have cost a pretty penny." Mark simply smiled. If only they knew. The night was young, the air thick with the kind of performative socializing that defines suburban gatherings. Glasses clinked, conversations rose and fell like waves, and beneath it all, something waited. Something Mark had carefully prepared. Karen continued to move between her guests, adjusting a throw pillow here, refilling a drink there. Her control was absolute, or so she believed. Each movement was calculated, each interaction carefully managed. She was the queen of this small domain, ruling with a smile that never quite reached her eyes. But Mark knew something she didn't, something that would change everything. As midnight approached, the first hint of what was to come began to manifest. A slight tremor, so subtle that most would have missed it, but Mark noticed, and he waited. The clock struck midnight, and something changed. It was imperceptible at first, a nearly invisible shift that most would dismiss as a trick of the light or a momentary sense of disorientation. But Mark knew better. Sarah Reynolds was mid-sentence describing her latest yoga retreat when she first noticed. Her designer heels seemed to slide almost imperceptibly. Tom Harrison's expensive watch caught the moonlight, its precise movement suddenly seeming less certain. The potted plants, so carefully positioned by Karen, began to lean at the slightest, most unnatural angle. Karen herself remained oblivious. She was busy critiquing the catering, her voice cutting through the background noise with surgical precision. "The Capri skewers are slightly room temperature," she announced to no one and everyone. "I specifically requested they be chilled to exactly 38 degrees. Mark took another sip of his scotch, watching. The first person to vocalize concern was Mrs. Peterson. "Is it just me?" she asked, her voice wavering slightly, "or does something feel different?" Tom laughed, a sharp, forced sound. "It's probably just the wine. Karen always serves top-shelf liquor." But it wasn't the wine, and deep down they all knew it. The deck began to move. Not dramatically, not like a carnival ride or an earthquake, but with a precision that suggested something mechanical, something intentional. A slow, almost imperceptible rotation that would only become apparent after several minutes. Mark had spent years perfecting this mechanism. Years of careful planning, silent observation, understanding the intricate social dynamics of their little suburban world. This deck was more than just a piece of architecture. It was a statement, a carefully constructed trap. "Mark," Karen said, her voice suddenly sharp, "what exactly is happening?" He met her gaze. Calm, collected, a hint of a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Just a little neighborhood entertainment," he replied. The deck continued its slow rotation. Guests began to look around, confusion replacing their carefully maintained social masks. Drinks threatened to slide. Conversations died mid-sentence. The carefully curated world Karen had created was about to come undone. And Mark was going to enjoy every single moment of it. The mechanism was silent, a testament to Mark's engineering skills. But its effects were anything but quiet. Panic began to simmer beneath the surface of polite conversation. Feet shuffled. Hands gripped railings. The perfect evening was about to become something else entirely. Karen's perfectly applied makeup began to show the first signs of strain, a bead of sweat, a slight tremor in her perfectly lined lip. Something was happening. Something Mark had been waiting years to set in motion. The rotation continued, slow but inexorable. Objects began to shift, subtly at first, then with increasing urgency. A crystal wine glass teetered on the edge of his side table, then crashed to the deck. Sarah Reynolds' designer clutch slid across the surface, collecting splinters and leaving a trail of sequins in its wake. Everyone remained calm. Karen commanded, her voice rising an octave higher than her usual carefully modulated tone. But calm was the last thing anyone was feeling. Mark observed the scene with a detached fascination. Years of planning, of watching, of calculating had led to this moment. The deck, his masterpiece, was performing exactly as he had engineered it to do. Each rotation was programmed with mathematical precision, designed to create maximum psychological discomfort without causing actual physical harm. Tom Harrison, the tech executive, pulled out his smartphone, more as a reflexive gesture of control than any real hope of assistance. "No signal," he muttered, a tremor of panic finally breaking through his carefully cultivated professional veneer. The Petersons clung to each other, their matching linen outfits now wrinkled and askew. Mrs. Peterson's carefully styled hair had begun to come loose, wisps of gray escaping like smoke signals of distress. "Mark," Karen demanded, all pretense of social niceties gone. "Stop this immediately." But Mark simply smiled, a smile that spoke volumes of patience, of planning, of a long-awaited moment of revenge. You see, this wasn't just about a deck. This was about something that had happened years ago. Something Karen had done. Something unforgivable. 5 years earlier, Karen had been the president of the neighborhood association. Mark had proposed a community project, a shared garden that would benefit everyone. Karen had systematically blocked it, used her influence to turn the entire neighborhood against him. She had destroyed more than just a project. She had stripped away his reputation, his standing in the community. And now she would understand what it meant to lose control. The deck continued its slow rotation. The angle increased imperceptibly. Just enough to create genuine discomfort, just enough to shatter the illusion of control that Karen had worked so hard to maintain. Decorative items began to slide more dramatically. A potted orchid, Karen's pride and joy, tipped over, soil spilling across the increasingly tilted surface. Appetizer trays began to shift, sending carefully arranged hors d'oeuvres sliding into uncomfortable positions. "This is a lawsuit," Tom muttered, more to himself than anyone else. "This is absolutely." But his words were cut short as the deck continued its relentless movement. Mark watched and waited. The real show was just beginning. Chaos erupted with increasing intensity. The deck's rotation had become more pronounced, transforming from a subtle movement to an undeniable force. Guests scrambled for purchase, their carefully curated composure disintegrating with each passing moment. Karen's legendary control began to crack spectacularly. "This is impossible," she screamed, her perfectly manicured nails digging into the railing. The railing itself seemed to mock her, its smooth surface offering no real stability. Sarah Reynolds, who had spent months cultivating her social image, found herself sliding ungracefully across the deck. Her designer dress, which had cost more than most people's monthly rent, was now collecting dirt and splinters. Her carefully applied makeup ran in streaks, mascara trailing down her cheeks like black tears of humiliation. Mark remained the calm center of the storm. Each movement of the deck was a calculated symphony he had composed over years of meticulous planning. He'd studied engineering, learned the precise mathematics of rotation, stress points, and psychological breaking points. This wasn't just revenge, it was a work of art. The Petersons had abandoned all pretense of dignity. Mr. Peterson had lost one of his expensive loafers somewhere in the chaos, while his wife clung to a decorative planter like it was a life raft. Their matching outfits, once a symbol of their social aspirations, were now a mockery of their former carefully curated image. Tom Harrison, the tech executive who prided himself on solving complex problems, found himself completely helpless. His smartphone, usually a source of control and connection, was now useless, sliding across the tilting surface along with the rest of the evening's carefully arranged props. "Who does this?" Karen shrieked, her voice rising above the growing pandemonium. "Who does something like this?" Mark simply raised his glass of scotch, still miraculously upright, and took a measured sip. The deck continued its relentless rotation. Objects that once represented status and wealth, designer bags, expensive electronics, carefully curated decorative pieces, became nothing more than sliding debris. The very symbols of their social hierarchy were being systematically dismantled. Beneath the chaos, Mark remembered the community garden project Karen had destroyed. Remembered how she had used her influence to turn neighbors against him. Remembered the years of isolation of carefully planning this moment of perfect, calculated revenge. This wasn't just about humiliation. This was about exposing the fragile nature of their social constructs, how quickly order could become chaos, how thin the veneer of civilization truly was. As the deck continued its inexorable rotation, Mark knew the final act was about to begin. The most spectacular moment was yet to come.